You are watching Xirtus.
Okay. How about the Law of Æthelberht? A set of legal provisions
Right.
written in Old English, probably dating back to the 7th century, from Kent.
So this was recently brought up by Fresh Translator with Nachiketa on the weekend. And this was just one of these examples where he claimed, because we were just like talking about Fomenko and, what is true or not in history or in chronology. And then he suddenly said, oh, well, but there's these and these originals. I was like, well, please show me any original you can find. And he claims this should be an original document. I'll have to look at it properly and also see what David says about it, because by now I'm very, let's say, suspicious of anything that's claimed to be original, especially if it's claimed to be hundreds and hundreds of years old. So this is just a reference for a supposedly original document that should be preserved to this day. But I'll look into it to see if there's anything to it, really.
I would say there's some truth to it. But like that's maybe my bias is the idea that in World War One and Two, back to that time period, because England is an Anglo-Saxon country originally, a lot of things going on there with the Celts and the Picts and everything, and now today with everybody else. But the amount of Germanic origin of the relationship between England and Germany and Germanic people just generally was and is today even pretty strong, super strong, and even beyond the royal family, right? The royal family, the House of Wilhelm, which became the House of Windsor, changed their name to the House of Windsor to hide the fact that they were essentially a German family. And you've got King George of Hanover, all etc. So the idea that most of England in World War One would have been pretty down to be in an alliance with Germany. They're like sister nation, as we said earlier about Russia, right? But more like their brother nation. So there had to be so much effort made to convince British people that they were ideologically separate and apart from the Germanic people. So I think there's
let me
also a
just
big
mention one idea that David has brought up to me a few times, and this is something that I guess is impossible to find, it seems, in official mainland history. But the idea that sometime before what we would call the First World War, he mentioned that Germany, quote unquote, declared something like an Islamic caliphate, whatever this would have meant at that particular time, and that was part of the reason that gave so much motivation or impetus to exactly the type of social and psychological and war engineering you're speaking of right now. But this is a reference I don't think I have seen anywhere in mainline publication yet. But this would of course be a relevant aspect, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think again that's a good example of why things seem like they could be as old as that, though, because you look at in Bosnia and Mostar, Sarajevo, and you have essentially wherever there are the Muslims rather, the Muslims had a literary recording in by hand, which they continue to this day, scribing down and copying books, and so they have books that have been copied so many times, and that takes a certain amount of years and generationally how long it takes for someone to need to do it again, that they can say, oh, it goes back to the 9th century, right? Or something like that, which is that's the historical continuity that we could rely on the most, probably, or the Muslim records. But simultaneously in Germany, because of that, in the 15th century, 13th to 15th century, you have the scribe culture where they're constantly doing the same thing for the churches and for the elite of the Catholic Church, which makes it really convenient to change things at that point. Because at that point, then they've hired them and they can say, hey, while you're copying the book, just make sure that you change the year, right?
Just make sure it fits our narrative and put the Jesuit stamp on top. Exactly that. And the
Totally.
second thing is that then, of course, with the linotype, which is why we have all these neatly spaced out books, another revision would have happened around 1900. Whereas again, those books that, just as you mentioned, if they are really old already, were copied many times over just to preserve them, then
Mm-hmm.
potentially changed in copying them over if you hired the guy who's your monk and, making sure that your narrative fits. And then you have another point where you need to adapt it for print, where again, a lot could be changed. So I have to look closer at this document, whether this, could be print or it's an actual manuscript. and then look at, there's apparently different techniques how to make something look or appear old, right? We could look at the language, whether there's any other proof. No, there wouldn't.
Especially not during the time of the Jesuit suppression, when they had to hide who they were and be essentially like a secret society by law for a period of time. That would be crazy, right? Like that wouldn't make sense for the Lutheran King George of Hanover over England to have been a Jesuit, right? Would it? The Jesuit who was hiding as a Lutheran in the Holy Roman Empire that was no longer under the Sophia Naturalization Act and could take over England, making German, British royalty. But I think it's still interesting then that these are showing that how close, because this is what we know about the 15th century at least, that at least in the last 400 or 500 years, they were speaking some sort of a Persian Gothic Germanic language, which is pretty much Old German, right? And so that makes a lot of sense that they would have this. I think that that's fair. I know that Ewing's going to say this is backwards Arabic or something, but it is what it is. Okay. What about and it's all from the Textus Rofensis.
Makes it sound very official.
Okay.
Tom of Rochester.
Well, it sounds kind of, yeah. Which is cool because the Earl of Rochester, who's my favorite, John Wilmot. Well, might as well bring that up for a second. Earl of Rochester, John Wilmot. The second Earl of Rochester. Have you ever seen this guy? I think we might have talked about him at some point. Where's the painting of him? Here. This is his best painting. Look what he's doing with that monkey. How cool is this guy? Like, right? You gotta understand, this is like the most liberated person in 16 or 1700, at that point in history. And so for him to come from the Rochester, I find that interesting. What's up with that macaw monkey?